what time it is. It is noontime on the Eastern Seaboard, and it is time to kick off our webinar today, our live webinar, part of the Blue Dragon webinar series. And the discussion for today is going to be about organizational resiliency. And we've kind of loosely structured this around the power outages that are happening in California and the Southwest Airlines cancellations, flight delays. But that's not really the main topic. The topic is about organizational resiliency. And let me do some introductions real quick. My name is Rob Bill Estrella. I'm the owner and founder of DLE Technical Services, but I'm also the creator of the Blue Dragon Integrated Problem-Solving System, which is in wide use throughout the nuclear weapons complex, at the national laboratories, and some very complex operating environments, such as nuclear power and so on. And here with me today is my cohort friend and associate, Dr. Bill Toth. And Bill, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, I joined the Blue Dragon team officially about 2 years ago, although have had an association with Rob for more like 5 years. I took his live class at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and we kind of hit it off because a lot of my research interests fall right in line with how Blue Dragon has been developing and looking at complex systems. I'm interested in my research and what really bad things about organizations. So organizational dysfunction to the point of espionage, mass killings, and high consequence industrial accidents. And it all sounds terribly dark. I'm really not quite as morose as my dissertation would make it seem. But I am interested from the perspective of making organizations function appropriately, and in this case, in today's topic, nimbly, to save money and to save lives. So
thanks, Bill. And since 2006, I've been solving those kind of problems across the nuclear weapons complex, as I said before, the Department of Energy primarily. But interesting aside, I got to tell this story real quick. So I read Bill's thesis, right? And he's talking about all kinds of dark, gruesome terrorist attacks and murders and things like that. One of them was the Chief Walker case, where this Navy chief was selling secrets out of his safe in a nuclear submarine out to the Russians. Well, when I arrived on board the USS Simon Bolivar and I became the division officer of the communications division, guess who owned the safe from which the chief was stealing the documents? That ended up being my safe. And I read about this in Bill's thesis, and I mean, wow, we have to talk. And so Bill and I have been closely aligned ever since. But to get on topic for today, we have a really interesting topic, and this is about resiliency and design. How do we design resiliency into our systems? But even better, how do we analyze our systems to see if they are resilient? And that means, can we recover from a problem? Or even better, can we proactively head off a problem? And so we're going to talk about resiliency and design and how we're designing our organizations and the systems and subsystems within our organizations. And I am going to be your moderator for the day, and I'm going to be asking Dr. Toth here some pointer questions, and we're going to have a good dialogue about the topic of the day here. So Bill, let me start off about this. So with regards to design and organizational resiliency, how extreme should our design considerations be? What are we designing against?
So in the Blue Dragon sense, and in just the sense of safety and security, we know that defenses take many, many different forms. We can have administrative defenses, we can have physical defenses, we can have personnel-based defenses. And the answer always becomes, how much is too much? So if you put enough things around a physical asset, that can be very protective. If you put it in a vault, or a critical asset in a vault, or as the image has just popped up, we know if we put enough of protections around ourselves, we can actually prevent ourselves from falling and hurting ourselves. The problem then becomes, well, how much is too much? Have I put out around myself so many defenses that I can't actually even move? So the image that just popped up here is from that popular movie Iron Man, when Tony Stark is actually a hostage for a short period of time, and he creates the first Iron Man suit out of junk and parts that he finds around the yard. And he's brilliant, so he does an amazing job at doing with what he has. And he creates this Mach 1, or this phase 1 of the Iron Man suit, which in in the objective of getting him out of his captivity and blasting through his enemies is perfectly adequate. But as we know, if you watch the movie, he can barely move. He can just achieve the one objective, and then he moves out into this hero role where the first version of this suit is completely inappropriate because he can't move. He can't actually move. So the movies go on, and we all got pulled into the franchise and watched the development of the Iron Man suit to where he becomes resilient and nimble. So now his armor, which protects him, the defenses in this metaphor, actually give him superhero status, but it also allows him to move and fly with great nimbleness and able to take on his enemies. Of course, it's a silly metaphor for how much defense is necessary in an organizational setting from a safety or security standpoint to actually achieve the goal of keeping people safe and at the same time maintaining a reasonable amount of productivity. Because safety and security tend to be the enemy of productivity, although that's a debatable point in its own right. But generally speaking, you must slow down in order to stay safe. You must slow down in order to maintain vigilance over quality problems. And you must do things that actually slow down productivity if you want to keep things secure. So how much is too much?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you, Bill. So let's talk about serious terrorist threats or 100-year storms like this massive flooding here. How much is too much? What do we design for? For example, if we were to design a house because we were scared of a nuclear accident or a nuclear war, then we would end up, all of us, living in bunkers underground, right? So let's talk about that. How much is too much? Are we designing resiliency? And does that mean just adding more and more defenses? Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Right. So we experienced some rolling blackouts. Rob and I are in different places. I'm in East Tennessee and Rob's in Florida. And during the past severe cold snaps that we experienced in December of 2022, just in case we don't have timestamps, we actually had rolling blackouts. And the rolling blackouts were by the Tennessee Valley Authority to maintain some availability of power for everyone who was on the grid. So you can ask yourself, well, I pay a lot of money for power from TVA, and I demand zero blackouts. Well, they could potentially design such a system where I could get zero blackouts. However, the redundancy necessary and the measures necessary to assure zero blackouts would undoubtedly raise my rates. And so if I were given a choice to vote on whether I want to have reasonable power rates and have to endure occasionally, meaning once or twice a year, no power for 30 minutes or so, I think that's the way I would vote. I would definitely say that maintaining my zero power outage status would be too much and too expensive in the long run for the rates that I would pay for power. Now, we can debate that. People can have their own attitude, and they could vote the other way. They said, my business or my life is so critical that I can't endure any power outages at all, and I would want to pay more. But that's kind of a democratic system also, because not everybody's going to vote the same way. So if you get caught in a circumstance where you've lost power like we did, and it's 5 degrees outside, and we had to endure power outages a couple or 3 times during the 5-degree snap, just make sure we have sweaters available. Now, we can have a broader conversation about its impact on the homeless or on people who don't have the means that I do to bundle up. But nevertheless, in general, I think that it's too much to ask that we try to design in systems that would be zero chance of power outages. And incidentally, even those systems have some percentage of failure. Despite how many layers and how many defenses you put on a system, they can also fail as well. So you could end up spending a lot more money for 100% available power, and it actually fails you even in that case as well. So I guess I would vote for something more conservative.
So let me paraphrase a little bit here. So what I think I'm hearing you say, Bill, is that you have to have reasonable expectations as a customer for designing resilient systems, like your power supplies, for example, because there has to be that balance between the right amount of protection / resiliency and cost and other considerations and factors like cost. So do consumers of power have the right or the expectation to expect zero outages forever? Probably not, because they wouldn't be willing to pay for what it would cost to have a system with the reliability of e to the minus 6 or something like that, right? So
Right.
we have to have some maybe local resiliency, if you will. Maybe people can have their own power generators and, like you said, blankets for those perturbations, and that's not very costly. That could be handled at the local level. But let's talk about another serious set of issues that we have seen here recently, and that's the cancellations and flight delays of major airlines like Southwest Airlines. And I think that's been in the news quite recently, and there's a lot going on there. So, do customers, Bill, have the right and the expectation to never have flight cancellations or flight delays? And what would it take to create a supremely resilient airline operations?
Yeah, so this is a very similar conversation, obviously. The debate and recently for all the catastrophic cancellations that we experienced around the holidays comes down to virtually every airline and the mode that they use, which is called hub and spoke. So if I fly Delta Airlines, my option from East Tennessee is to fly to Atlanta or to Cincinnati, one of the hubs for Delta, and then fly out of there to somewhere else. Whereas Southwest, which incidentally we don't have a Southwest service in Knoxville, and that's relevant to the discussion. Southwest uses a point-to-point type circumstance, and Southwest has traditionally, over the long haul, gained a great reputation for customer service, low-cost airline, and very reliable on-time service. However, each one of these systems comes with its own inherent weaknesses, and because of a lot of circumstances that lined up, Southwest had a kind of a catastrophic circumstance around the holidays with their point-to-point service. Incidentally, the hub and spoke didn't have as much. So the question then becomes, now I want to mitigate that, and what do I do? Well, I add more airplanes into the system so that I can have more options if one plane goes down or one doesn't arrive on time in this point-to-point service. But again, now we're looking at a lot of complex relationships. Do the airports actually have space for the new airplanes? Am I as a passenger going to be willing to pay the extra ticket cost because they will pass the cost of new airplanes on to customers? Airlines are lean and mean, and I've heard several lectures on their business model, and their margins are so slim that even a slight increase in fuel cost can actually cause their profitability to go very badly. So clearly, if I'm proposing to add airlines to a point-to-point type service, I'm going to increase the cost somewhere. So again, as a passenger, just like as a consumer of power, should I say that occasionally I'm going to miss my flight, occasionally that I'm going to have a canceled flight, and I'm going to have to figure out some other way to do that. And the price for accepting that is I get to have reasonably low-cost airfare. And I, again, would vote in that direction rather than exorbitant fares where I knew that I was 100% never going to have any delays. So I build these kinds of delays into my expectation of my own travel. If I have a circumstance, I rarely want a circumstance where I absolutely have to be at a particular place on a particular day. If I do, I'm going to go a couple of days early or build it into my own schedule. So I think some of this comes to personal responsibility. And again, this is my opinion. Maybe somebody has a different opinion.
Well, and so we can have some resiliency of our own, not just rely on the organizational's resiliency. So let's switch gears a little bit, because the other half of this webinar is not just to talk about some of these very visible topics, these visible failures, if you will, like the power outages that continue to happen in various states. And you saw the graphic from California where over 51 million people went without power during a certain period. And we have, of course, one of the most serious flight cancellations in history over the holidays, costing Southwest Airlines nearly 800 billion if you go read some of the articles in the news. We're going to switch to now a discussion on, all right, so what can we do about it? And there's two ways of doing something about these kinds of organizational problems, as complex and wicked as it might be. One is, of course, reactive. And so I want to bring up this simple slide. It's called the bow tie model. And the bow tie model helps us explain and manage and investigate risk. It helps us to assess risk. And on the left side, you have all the hazards that could threaten your operations. And you see the threats there, right about here. And then you see right next to it a line of defenses. And that's the key to all of this. So we put in place programs, processes, procedures, policies. If lives are involved, then you see the Code of Federal Regulations exacts some very strict guidelines. For example, in aerospace and healthcare and building nuclear plants, they all have very strict regulations that flow down into local operating procedures and policies. So we have a line of defenses to keep us safe, but we have events like the ones we're talking about here. And now we're into the mitigation side of it all. So we have to have post-event mitigation strategies for recovering, for analyzing, for lessons learned, for mitigating, and hopefully the final consequences are not going to be as bad as they might otherwise be. So we have to have that whole reactive side. Of course, that's reactive. We'd rather be proactive. So we want to talk about that a little bit. And in terms of Blue Dragon and what we bring to the table is a very sophisticated, holistic approach, which includes systems theory and other things. But we take a really hard look at the kinds of things that are allowing the event to take place. And let's focus in on that line of defenses. So, of course, when we have an event, we are able to go in and bring in all of the requirements, including any physical barriers that you might have to keep people safe, including any cyber barriers to protect information, and of course, all of the administrative requirements, regulations, policies, programs, procedures that we talk about. And we evaluate all of those to see what didn't work, because I don't care if we had 100 defenses in place, they didn't prevent the event from happening. So we have to take a very hard look at our line of defenses and figure out what's not working well, what was weak, and what's most difficult is what's not there. So missing defenses, missing barriers is often what we'll find, and that's very difficult to find. It's almost like looking for the black hole in the stars, right? It's what's not there that's important to us. But let's shift now to proactive. We can do the same thing without having an event proactively by evaluating our existing lines of defenses in any organization. And these proactive self-assessment can take on many forms. You hear about quality assurance audits, quality assurance assessments, Lean Six Sigma process improvement initiatives, and so many other ways that people do self-assessments, operational readiness reviews, peer evaluations, organizational self-assessments. So there's lots of ways that you can look at your defenses proactively. And now if we bring in the Blue Dragon system, and I'm going to put up a typical chart here, our three-phase system, which has us very carefully bring in every bit of evidence that we can gather, the who, what, when, where, how, but not the why. And we do a phase one approach, which is to evaluate every piece of information, whether it be documented on timelines. We do an analysis of all of our defenses. We generate the most precise, focused, evidence-based lines of inquiry questions that are unbiased. They're neutral because they're based on the evidence, the factual evidence that we brought in, and they're based on the standards, expectations, regulations that are in stone. We look for the gaps in performance. We generate the great questions, and that's the result of phase one. Great line of inquiry questions that really cut to the chase, which takes us to phase two, which is we bring in the subject matter experts of Southwest Airlines, of the federal government, whoever it might be we're looking into. And we go through these lines of inquiry questions and get to the root of the causes, the deepest seated causes, which you see down here, and their contributing factors. So we have a very rigorous, systematic process and approach that really is very accurate, but also extremely efficient. I'll tell you this quick aside. We were recently hired to do an investigation for the federal government. They were spending, or had spent in the past, 50 people, 50 staff, over the course of 6 months to evaluate issues with capital asset projects. Projects that were hundreds of millions over budget, years behind schedule. And we were brought in this particular instance, and we reviewed a capital asset project of that same exact nature. And we did it with 6 to 8 people part-time in 6 weeks. And the results were outstanding. In fact, the folks at the DOE who were in charge of that got an award for that. Anyway, once we have these deepest seated causes and issues, now we work with stakeholders and apply such concepts as the hierarchy of hazard controls, and we bring in lean mistake proofing, We'd sit with the stakeholders to develop the best possible corrective actions and solutions for these exact deep-seated causes that we identified during the analysis. So this is a complete comprehensive system that really gets to what's really wrong and helps organizations strengthen those defenses, whether we do it without an event proactively or after an event, real time / reactively. Um, doesn't matter. We're going to have some very strong results, very powerful effects. Overall, you want to strengthen your defenses so that future events don't happen. And that's I think what the value of it all is. So, Bill, back to you. Your thoughts. You used Blue Dragon at a national laboratory, and give us a little bit more on the uses of Blue Dragon.
So I think one of the things that we face as a challenge is some of the questions that we opened with, which are what are design considerations, what are our design constraints? Because Blue Dragon is very powerful and it will drive you down to answers which sometimes are inconvenient from those kinds of metrics. They're inconvenient to management. I know that the root cause of my problem is blank, and I know that I need to fix it, but we have neither the money nor the inclination to do so. And therefore, we're going to move ahead, stop at intermediate cause, or in some other way put other kinds of compensatory measures in place. So this does happen, that you get management pushback because this is a very rigorous and very clear system. It will clearly show you the right answer. Whether you want to accept the right answer is a different matter entirely. So we are practitioners and we're there to help. We can't force any organization to do the right thing or the expedient thing or whatever. But we can show you the clear answer. Whether you pick it up and implement that is a different issue.
Very good. And to tee off on what you said, Bill, it takes organizational courage. It takes courage to want to understand what's really at the heart of your issues so that then you can apply the right level of resources to fix them. We're talking with a client right now who has a $10 billion budget. It's a government agency in charge of a particular program, and they have an annual budget of $10 billion. However, are they spending it correctly? And our position is that the types of investigations that are done in many government agencies and also private organizations are never in depth enough to really find the true deep-seated causes. They continue to spend money on band-aiding the symptoms, the superficial, the low-hanging fruit, those first-tier causal factors that are only going to address just a few of the possible millions of sequences, cause and effect sequences that are demonstrating that there's something wrong in the organization. Well, you keep band-aiding it, you'll keep spending the money year after year, you never really stop the hemorrhaging. And that's why, as I say many times over in our Blue Dragon seminars, webinars, the cost of recurring issues across various industries is in the trillions of dollars in waste per year. Healthcare is wasting, this is per the Journal of American Medicine, they're wasting between 760 billion to 935 billion per year on average. And in the IT world, the cost of poor software quality per CISQ, the Consortium for IT Quality, they're estimating the annual cost of poor software quality to be 2 trillion plus per year. In fact, the number that sticks out for me is that in 2018, that cost was $2.8 trillion in waste due to all kinds of problems. So imagine if we could solve the real issues, get really deep and solve some of these problems. The impact on our economy could be enormous. Yet here's the bottom line for us. Mainstream academia does not create masters and PhDs in complex problem solving of human-centric problems in modern socio-technical work environments. And that's what Bill and I are doing. We're teaching this. We're actually practitioners and have been for our whole careers. And we didn't go the mainstream academia route for this. This is something we learned along the way because the skills that are needed to actually solve these complex human-centered problems are not the ones that a typical PhD scientist or engineer is going to have. Bill, anything to add before we wrap things up?
One of the things, as you were talking, Rob, I thought about Deming again and avoiding numerical goals. So I think that one of the other aspects is in designing these systems and performing these activities is think about what our intention is. So from the world that I came from in the government world, we had audits all the time. So there is a way to actually pass an audit without actually getting to the quality of the process that you're dealing with. So if your intention is to pass the audit, you may have one set of activities. If your intention is real quality in operations, you may have a different set of activities. Clearly, maybe the analogy in education is: are you teaching to the test, or are you actually teaching concepts? Are you actually making a substantive increase in the educational standing of the individual, or are you teaching to a test? Clearly, if you teach to a test, that's the way we're evaluated, and we may have some momentary or even some long-term success. But if you really want to make foundational changes, you're going to have a different intention, which is to really dig deep, find those organizational deficiencies, and fix them at their root. And that's what the Blue Dragon process is all about. And I'm not saying that we're always allowed to go there. However, the real organizational courage says we're going to go to the deepest and darkest places, the stuff that I like to think about, and fix the deepest, darkest problems so that they don't manifest in other aspects and other places in our organization. So I'm confident that this is a worthwhile, noble, even holy mission, and I think that we should do it, and we should challenge ourselves to continue to do that.
Thanks, Bill. And that about wraps it up. We're at the 26-minute mark. I think this was an excellent discussion. We look forward to your questions here. We have a Q&A section up there. And while you're considering, if you have any questions to ask us, let me give you this teaser. So next week is our monthly Blue Dragon National Forum with our clients, folks that have been through our training. And we're going to give them a really interesting topic that's very current events. We're going to show on our Blue Dragon charts how we would investigate these issues related to the mismanagement of classified information by the Trump organization and by the Biden organization. We're going to have the two charts side by side. Bill and I were just talking about that this morning. It can be easily, readily done. And I believe if the special counsel would just bring us in, we could cut to this chase in a matter of weeks, and not the 6 months with ungodly amounts of taxpayer dollars burned while they interview scores of people and then try to make sense of all their interview notes. We don't work that way. We work on these charts as our final product from the start. So we would love to come in and help these organizations solve these problems efficiently at a great savings to the taxpayer. But if you're online and you're one of our students, come join us next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, where we have our, like I said, our monthly national forum for Blue Dragon practitioners. And that probably is going to be interesting enough, Bill. Don't you think we should probably post that video on YouTube for everyone? I think that'd be very interesting.
Yeah, for us to get on the special counsel's team, maybe a little bit hopeful, wishful thinking, but yeah, it certainly would be interesting. And for the folks watching this thing, we are interested in reactions as well as questions. So if you think that something that we said is crazy, if you would be one of the ones that would vote for 0 flight delays or 100% power, then please comment and then let me know why you think that way. Absolutely. I'm not saying that I have the right answer.
So we're going to stick around here. There's a few folks watching this broadcast, and we'll wait to see if there's any questions or comments on the chat. And after a certain amount of time, we'll probably sign off. Of course, we'll edit this video down later and make it available to everyone online through this the Blue Dragon YouTube training channel. So this will be available in, as they say, evergreen. Very good. It's always fun to have a pregnant pause while you're live online, isn't it? Maybe it's time to bring in your first grade teacher. We can always edit this out, Bill. I'm kind of afraid, but you kind of scare me with that.
Yeah,
it's a creepy little puppet.
She's always looking over my shoulder.
First grade nun. I remember getting rapped over the knuckles by nuns when I was growing up. They can be scary. Yeah, I went to a Catholic school for the first few grades.
Yeah, I was an 8-year man myself. So I actually enjoyed my interactions with the nuns. They were always very kind to me, unlike the stories that I've heard from other people. So.
Well, let me look at our stream chart here, and certainly there's a little bit of a delay between the live stream and what we're putting out, so I'm giving it a little time. But we're getting close to wrapping it up. It's actually 12:30. We hit it on the mark, Bill. How about that? We're planning on doing a lot more of these webinars, by the way, and we're going to try to make it current and relevant. And in fact, the more adept we get at doing this, we'll actually try to throw up a chart and show how we would populate the chart with the information available, even if it's from sources that are not perfect. But we're going to use the information available on mainstream media, throw it on the chart, knowing that if we were doing the real deal, it'd be validated data. And the requirements will be the same, right? The references, the Code of Federal Regulations, and some of the key programs, procedures that we can get our hands on for the particular topic du jour will be the real deal. And we'll show you how we build out our line of inquiry questions and how we then would roll into speaking to all the subject matter experts and guiding them through a cause and effect analysis, which is the power of Blue Dragon. So we can bring to bear hundreds of subject matter experts in a short amount of time, as opposed to one-on-one interviews and collecting copious notes that are a royal pain. So no more note-taking. We work straight on the charts on the final product. Well, Bill, I'm inclined to give it like one more minute and then sign off. I've had a lot of fun doing this. How about you?
Yes,
Except for that
absolutely.
creepy nun. Let's not do that creepy nun thing again. We're gonna whack that from the video.
Well, her name is Sister Spooky. So
Sister Spooky. Yeah, I valid, especially when you moved her mouth.
yeah.
I'm glad you didn't make any attempts at ventriloquy. Well, all right. So with that, and we don't do this very often, so we don't have a really good sign-off mode, but enough to say that we're going to end it here. And Bill, it's been a pleasure. Take care, everyone.
Yes.
Look for future Blue Dragon webinars. We're going to be coming at you at least once or twice a month. Take care, everyone. Till next time.